What's up, peers, and welcome to the World Crypto Network. Here, continuing the Bitcoin reading group as every Saturday we are. Today, continuing the book For a New Liberty by the great Murray Newton Rothbard. And I'm not alone. That is the joy of things. I'm joined, as always, by Ben. How are you doing?
I'm great, Max. How you doing, brother?
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, Raphael, what's up?
All good, man. Thanks for the invite.
Yes, as always, everyone is gladly invited to join us here to discover a bit the Austrian roots and where this economics and this ethics of Bitcoin actually comes from and why it is so important. So Ben, you wanted to lead us in today. What do you have?
Yeah, so I was discussing with my friend Gigi today, and I've kind of been like working on this idea for a little while, and I've been refining it. But essentially, this is like delving into the history of money. I've gained a perspective on the why we have essentially why we have gone through different evolutionary like epochs of money. Why would we move from one to the other? And I'm working on a history of money infographic that kind of tells this tale a little bit, but it has to do. So money is a way of scaling society, and essentially, like when we start in a very, if you go back many thousands of years, you get back to small tribes, like 50, maybe 100 people, and they worked without money there. They would work on favors, and they would work with barter, and it scaled very well for those size societies. The invention of money allowed us to scale between tribes, so that we used commodity money, like wheat or like arrowheads, or there were many things that were used as commodities, but they also became money because of their widespread use. And this allowed us to scale between tribes. And eventually lots of different iterations of money later, we started scaling to much larger tribes and also in between these larger tribes. And gold developed on the free market as, the best commodity money, because of its, well, as Saifedean puts it, because of its stock to flow, meaning that the supply of its, the total supply of it in relation, the total stock of it in relation to the flow of new gold, was so high, meaning that there was not a lot of new gold entering the market after a long time, that the supply was relatively stable, and therefore its value was relatively stable, because it became widespread, its widespread use. Anyway, moving on, we eventually and kind of concurrently we developed codified monies, right? And like coins and notes. Coins sometimes contained gold, and sometimes they didn't, and they were often tied to gold. But notes developed even many thousands of years ago with the ancient Chinese dynasties. They used paper notes, and these coins and notes served a few purposes. One which was like to have a standard unit value, but another one, like especially in the case of notes, was so that we could scale beyond physical weight. Right, so gold became very heavy to transact with. So as we took these tribes to much larger scales, and as we were interacting between these tribes, and this became a global effort, right? We became a global civilization where we're moving economic goods around the globe. That transacting with gold became, very difficult, and we evolved then towards these paper monies that allowed us to scale civilization even much farther, and we could move money around much more quickly, much more effortlessly, and much cheaper. And this was these were all benefits to society. They allowed us to scale even farther and farther. But the paper money, it introduced like a security hole, right? Where that although these coins, for many thousands of years have been debased, or we call it coin clipping, or, sometimes they would be taken out of circulation and a whole new coin would be put out, right? So that they could keep the gold with the centralized parties. As we went to paper money, it made that problem much worse. And although it was allowing us to scale at the same time, it created this problem that was almost as big of the organizations that are in control of the production of money were given such undue power. And a lot of this stuff is probably a review for a lot of you guys, but the important point here is that because Bitcoin works without a central authority, it will allow us to scale to the next level. Because we are a global civilization, we will become a global civilization. I believe that because we needed governments to codify and standardize that money. You can call the organization whatever you want, but it becomes a government when it has control over the money, because it has control over the people that way, because it can manipulate their value system that they use. We are propping up the government by allowing them to do this, because we are bestowing that power upon them, and it gives them power over us. So essentially, what I'm trying to say with Bitcoin simply existing, it returns that power, I think, to the individual, and that, I think, will allow us to scale to the next level of civilization, where nation states become either less, or maybe some of them kind of dissolve altogether, because I think one of the largest things that we needed government to do for us was to organize our money for us. And I don't know, that could be naive, but that's the basic concept, and it wasn't very concise, but that's the idea I'm working on. So I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Very interesting, and I would agree
Yeah.
that, especially with fiat money, right? Fiat is state money, money through aggression. That is where we need a state or have a state institution enforcing the legal tender laws. Because guess what? You would not store your value in worthless pieces of paper that I can print. No, you would not do that. That's not rational. So you have to be coerced into it. Right? And there are justifications, of course, countless of them, on why it is okay to apply coercion here in this sense of currency. Of course, I would argue that all of them are bullshit, and aggression is never the right thing to do. And then on the other hand, right now with Bitcoin, we have something else. We have something that does not need to have this aggressive force put into it. Right? It is a money that is based not on a vote or not on a tyranny of a single tyrant or monarch. It is based on consensus where everyone agrees. And that is very powerful, because it allows us to organize in a network where we are 100% in agreement, and where there is no aggression, but only cooperation between individual nodes. And that is very powerful. Right? And to have that then on a monetary sense, the money is so vitally important for any sovereign individual, or just the economy in general. And so when we have a sound money that is not based on aggression, but that is actually mutually beneficial for everyone, that will allow us to increase the production stages of our consumption goods, which means we need to accumulate more capital in order to then build out these very complex systems that allow us to, at the end, after a long process of many decades of work and experience and human ingenuity and entrepreneurship, that then we have a final product that is as delightful that it can be, that it helps others to remove some of the uneasiness that they experience right now. Right? And that is the power of the money. And so having a free sovereign money like Bitcoin, compared to the aggressive system of legal tender, I don't think you can overestimate what powerful impact that has on a human. But Raphael, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. And I just think that the paper money and coins were kind of like a trade-off to scaling. They just wanted to do it way too quickly, and maybe there just wasn't really a better way to just go on and do that kind of like overseas trading and all of that stuff. So I don't know. I just think it was a bad trade-off, and it's good that we have now a better option. And the best thing that I think in Bitcoin is that you aren't forced to use that, or, well, anything really. I mean, you can choose whichever type of money you want. And in my opinion, Bitcoin is just that currency that people have been choosing for now. And that's because of their free will, not because people are forcing you to use like euros or dollars. And that's a big difference. I mean, in usual democracy type of system, if 51% wants to use euro, then you also have to use, even if you belong into that 49. But now we really have an option, and I think that's one of the biggest, the best thing about Bitcoin.
Yeah, I like what you said, that you said maybe, but I actually think it's true, is that you said that maybe there wasn't really a better option. I feel like this whole evolution of these different types of monies were very natural, and they all made sense at the time, and that there weren't any other better options because we basically used the best options that were available to us. And there were trade-offs. Everything is trade-offs, right? We talk about scaling Bitcoin and these different things. They're all trade-offs, right? And it's about the consequences of what options we do choose. But there's
Yeah.
I mean,
I do think
right?
that. Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm saying, like, right? Doesn't that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't really a way to make sure that people are telling the truth and, well, prevent double spending on all of these different problems. So I don't know. That's just something that was created when Bitcoin came out.
Yeah, exactly, right. It's the double spending problem. And again, the double spending problem means that Alice can spend the same coin that she has, the same amount of currency, first to Bob, right? And then take the same unit and also give it to Charlie, right? But all those that listen to the blabbering that I do here know what this is. This is scarcity, right? The double spending the double spending problem is a establishment of scarcity in the cyberspace, and that is really, really, really difficult. Especially because most of the time, for the last 40 years in computer science, well, before Bitcoin, we had to do this with a centralized, coercive way, where we have one institution that enforces that Alice can only spend that coin with either Charlie or Bob, right? But the central point of failure is, of course, a central point of failure for all the many countless reasons that central planning does not work, right? And then what we have now with Bitcoin is a way that everyone becomes the central point of enforcing the digital scarcity, right? Your full node enforces scarcity. It's mind-blowing. Running a full node is insane. Because you actually establish scarcity out of a digital protocol that is non-scarce in its single parts, but all of it together makes scarcity possible, and that is it is unbelievable.
Yeah, and due to our choice of which scaling method we used for gold, which was the paper money, we required a centralized authority to oversee that, right? And we required them to verify it for us. And now that we have one, we have a method of transferring value that is scarce as a digital commodity, that we don't need the governments to enforce that for us. We can do it for ourselves. And I think us as people, we are not the flag that we live under. We are not the soccer team that we like. We are not the language that we speak. We are humans. We are the human civilization. And I believe that the future may actually hold in store for us a globe of sovereign individuals that can kind of eschew some of these tribal boundaries that I think are illusions propped up by this status quo.
I don't know why, but the trade-off by using paper money and central authority to scale to a bigger market, and that just reminds me of the Bcash people and that kind of trade-off, when you want to just scale way too fast and provide the payment system cheaply as possible to everyone, by taking this trade-off of making it possible to centralize the system itself, and all these different kind of problems. I just think it's great that we actually fought to keep this in the way it is, and just improving what we have, but not making the same mistake as before.
Yeah, 100%, man. I completely agree with you. That's why it's so important that now that we've kind of tried to reevaluate everything and really look at what the choices we made were and what the consequences of those choices were, and why that we do build a foundation of what the important qualities of money are, and that we keep them around, for this exact reason. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. That's what I was thinking of when I said trade-offs and scaling.
Yeah, and again, like the aspect of making payments is rather trivial, especially in a coercive way, right? Where a centralized party enforces the scarcity aggressively, and that, of course, here is doable, right? We can have digital scarcity, and with like super fast payments can easily be done. I mean, we could even do it with something like Charmian eCash, right? So we can have really like ethically righteous centrally enforced, aggressively enforced scarcity that lies completely in the trust of that one central authority. But then here, Bitcoin again makes it makes it possible for several of these aggressive enforcers of scarcity exist. And then if you are your own full node, right, you yourself check that. And it's not so much about making a payment then, right? It's about actually enforcing that there exists scarcity in this realm. And that is very much unbelievably more important than making payments, right? Because again, then once we have actually established scarcity, then we can build on top of that cheap and easy payments. And we can have then a more centralized approach. Maybe, for example, a Charmian eCash, right? We might be able to do that now that we have scarcity. But we could not do it beforehand because there was no scarcity. Right? But now that we have it with Bitcoin, I would wager will become much more easier to do a sound implementation of Charmian eCash as it was before, right? Where the only backing that you had was, again, a centralized shitcoin run by one central aggressor. And so having this decentralized base layer of everyone enforcing scarcity, and that the most underlying foundation of Bitcoin as a money, as an economic good is even possible, that is infinitely more important than having cheap payments for your coffee.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like I said, one of the best things that you have options, and you can do this kind of like quick scaling or stuff like that in second layers, or just between a wallet or something like that. So there's always options, but you can go on and do everything without a central authority, and the main layer would be without anyone's central control. I think that's kind of like the biggest thing in there.
Yeah, I think this is so interesting. People point to why gold will always be money because it's been around for so long. And if we're talking about verifiability, right? Max is talking about running a full node. Essentially, like, gold proved that it was stable. Its stock to flow remained stable, and the stock remained stable because of that. And that is what has created trust in gold over many thousands of years. And then we didn't need to verify the supply of gold because it had already proven itself over a very long time. The supply was stable. We knew that. And then we only had to verify individual pieces of gold. And there are a number of different ways to do that, but none of them are trivial to do. You can, I think you can do a kind of ultrasonic verification on it. You can melt it down. You can check the density of it, and these have different trade-offs, right? More trade-offs. But Max had this one mind-blowing thing that he said in one of our conversations, where he said, well, not only does your full node verify the gold that you just received in an economic transaction, but it also verifies the entire supply of gold. Your full node melts down the entire supply of gold all at once. And this is very profound because now we can verify how scarce this good is, and that scarcity is key to this money. And we're talking about all these layers being built on top of Bitcoin. That if this fundamental layer is open, right? Anybody can write software that will interact with it as long as it follows the rules of Bitcoin. And we start to create these other layers like Charmian eCash or of Lightning, or there's the Liquid network, and maybe layers on top of these layers. The future is exponential. To this one sound money, the hardest, scarcest digital good. It's a lot.
It is. It's not going to be boring. Oh my.
Yeah, and I don't know, but I just think that gold it's really not that good of an option even for money. Only if you are in a physical space between the people you're gonna go barter with or do transactions with, then it's like, okay, well, best that you can have. But I don't know. I just think it's just weird how that has really been our best option before Bitcoin, and it's just so much worse than Bitcoin in movability and I don't know, in every possible way, pretty much. It's just a huge step forward.
Yeah, it is insane, right? And it's as Ben mentioned, it's that you don't just verify the scarcity of that one transaction, right? That you have, for example, that you give me the gold coin and now I actually hold it, which means in the real realm, right, the scarcity has enacted, right? Now I control it, you no longer. Now I am the sole authority over this coin, and I can exclude others from using it, right? Property rights, and this has happened just here with this one gold coin. And in meat space, it's trivial to verify this, because as soon as you have gold coin in your hands, like, you're good, pretty much, right? But of course, in the digital space, that is much more difficult, and that's why we need to have like chains of confirmations and stuff like that, and proof of work and everything, and the game theory and stuff behind it to just verify, okay, this is actually a legit Bitcoin that now can never be used by anyone else other than by me and by my script that I put on this coin, so that I can reveal it later, right? This is the fundamental attribute here of the scarcity. But then it's also, right, that part of this consensus rule is a limited supply, right? Bitcoin could have had, like, just as some shitcoins do, like 50 Bitcoin every block with no halvening. Bitcoin could have done that. It would have been just as scarce, right? One UTXO can only be controlled by one script. That is the scarcity of Bitcoin. It has nothing to do with the money supply, right? It is now a scarce good. Only one person can control it, and my use excludes others. Thus, we need property rights. Thus, we have the ability of using it as a sound money. That was the first thing Bitcoin had to achieve. It's not the only one, because now it is a scarce good, an economic good, but its usability as a money now further needs to be improved. It's not enough to be just a scarce good. Sand is scarce, but nobody uses sand as a money because it's a horrible money, because of many reasons. So Bitcoin now is scarce, one UTXO, one script, but also this means now it has to be a good money. And the halvening mechanism that Satoshi put into, to have a limited supply, that is an additional genius on the already unbelievable genius of emerging cryptographically proven scarcity, to then later put on top of this all the attributes that it needs to be a good money. I mean, Satoshi is legit. Holy fuck.
Yeah, legit. But yeah, I mean, if you would go ask any gold bug if they actually would like to know the total amount of gold that there is, they would probably want to. I mean, the more you know about the actual system or the money theory system itself, the more you're gonna trust it, or you kind of, well, at least know about it. And well, if you would ask them if they want to be able to, let's say, mail their gold bars to anyone around the world cheaply and quickly, I mean, they probably would. So that's one of the biggest things that probably people would like to do with gold, or get easily liquidity on it, or something like that. And it's just so much better with Bitcoin.
Yeah, the future is bright, my friends. When we can scale civilization to the next level. There's another concept that I don't know if we've talked about here that I still think is extremely profound, and I still haven't really found a way to talk about it. Is this idea that the prices of goods should be going down over time, right? As we get better at making things, they should become cheaper to produce. As we create new ways to produce goods and services, the whole idea of competition is that, you know, everybody's trying to make the cost of something go down. But the fiat inflationary worldwide regime has created a system where all the prices go up. And that part is well understood, but if the prices should be going down, but they are going up, that when we say 3% inflation, that's from zero. Really, they should be going down. So there's this whole other percentage that we're not even accounting for. And again, if we had a sound money that was not being inflated, the prices of everything would literally go down. So not only are we going to be able to scale the way that we transact with people worldwide, we're going to give people a store of value unlike anything that we've ever seen before, and that's going to allow them to store their labor output and their capital stock, right? That we have Messire talking about money as time, because we store our time that we expend at a job in our money, but that money is being inflated, so our time is being inflated. So this new tool, Bitcoin, allows us to store our time in a way that cannot be diluted. So it's not just being able to scale the transactions worldwide. We're going to be able to scale store of value worldwide, because right now only, I argue, only the richest and the most affluent among us, the ones that have access to the stock market and the real estate market, have access to real store of value, because we use the money to inflate the prices of these assets, which the rich use as money, as illiquid, volatile store value money, that giving people access to being able to store their money, their value over time in money that we already transact with, the liquid good, that will also help us scale. And why do I say that only rich have access? Maybe you might be thinking that, oh, well, anybody could buy an asset, but the paycheck warriors that live among us, and many of us are even maybe in this kind of category of people that aren't really able to store a lot of their wealth. It's a percentage, right? Like maybe I could buy a few stocks. I do okay, right? In my economic background, but how much percent of my money can I store in stocks and in real estate? And then the answer really is much easier if you understand somebody who is very wealthy. They can store a very large percentage of their wealth in these stocks and these assets that inflate, and that gives them access to store of value. And it's actually even better than store of value, because they're diluting the supply of all money, and using that wealth that they've kind of aggregated, and they've kind of appropriated from the populace to and put that money into more stocks and real estate. So it's not just going up at 3%; it's going up at 11 or 12 or whatever the average stock gain is, or the average real estate gain is, and that's not even to mention the negative effects on society of people using houses as money, because Marty Bent was just talking about this on Tales from the Crypt, where he said there's like some large percentage of the houses in New York that are used as money, and that they sit empty most of the time. So here you have 8 million people in New York City all trying to find an affordable place to live, and very wealthy people from outside of New York City are just buying houses in New York and driving up the price of those houses, so that the people that live there and work there can't buy them and can't live in them, as the rents keep going up. The wealthy are getting richer and richer because they have store of value, and the paycheck warriors, the ones that work the hardest and need the most help, are having no way to store their money.
Yeah, many great things that you bring up. And one thing that really cracked me up is that you said that Bitcoin literally changes time, right? Because we store our value, right? Our attention, our human ingenuity and entrepreneurship. And we store that within our money, right? And I really believe that Bitcoin messes with time, because seriously, like, what has happened in the last 1 year of Bitcoin? We've done so much in so little like fiat time, but in block time, we got so much shit done. And when you are in the rabbit hole and you really experience this to its fullest extent, it's like, holy, yeah, it's crazy how much is happening. And this is much faster than anything outside of Bitcoin would move. So it really might be that because it's such a, because hodlers just have this ultra low time preference, that we really get shit done really quickly, and that this literally increases the relative time of those individuals caught within the vortex of Bitcoin. That might be really nice. And then what you then continued up with here, with the aspect that other economic goods are misused as a store of value, because the main store of value is being aggressed against so much by the tyrants via inflation, right? And what you bring up here is it's exactly that point. Then also, like what you say is super valid, and on top of that, it's that the argument that gold has intrinsic value, one dude has said that in the chat as well, is exactly that same fallacy played out in your argument at large. Because a house has a other use case, right? Because it has an intrinsic value, which in and of itself is a fallacy, but it has a use case of being used as not a money, but as a shelter, right? Shelters are not money, shelters are shelters, right? And then this means that they have a different use. And this is on one part of the subjective value of any individual, right, is to have a house, because then you're no longer freezing to death. Pretty nice. So that's a huge part of the marginal subjective value. But then on top of that, right, there might be some other subjective value things that you like about it. Maybe it is the store value aspect, that you're like, well, if I have built it now, then I don't have to build it tomorrow, right? So that's good. You store your value, right? You make sure that it doesn't fall apart. And this means that you can longer enjoy the usability. That is also a store of value, right? Because you don't have to, that tomorrow again, do something with it, right? So that's good. But if this becomes too large, if the store of value aspect is too large, then we have a malinvestment, right? It is something that is artificially induced because of the fiat culture, because of aggression in the monetary supply. Then all of a sudden you try to evade, which is a natural human thing, to of course try not to get fucked up by the tyrants. And then you put your store of value portion here becomes larger and larger and larger, which then ultimately is a not as rational choice. You would not have done that if not for the aggression. And therefore, it's not mutually beneficial. It always leads to capital destruction. And so here again, right? But therefore then, because Bitcoin does not have a use case, a intrinsic value other than being a money, it is perfect. Right? It is perfect, because then we can get the store of value part of our intrinsic value of our house as low as possible. And this means that we will be much more efficient in our resource allocation, because again, we value something, well, less, so we can have more of it, so to say, right? We have other opportunity costs to do that. We don't have to pay as much for housing. Prices go down. That is exactly then what is happening here as well.
Yeah, and I like that what Ben also talked about the prices going up thing, and that's something that I've been researching also. Like I was looking at some charts, and the prices of basic products, at least here in Finland, has been going up for about 10 to 30% in basic, like groceries and all of that stuff. And while we use euros for the last 10 years, they have been trying to use this 2% of yearly inflation system. So that means already that we are getting like 21% more of euros printed in this 10 years at least. And while the prices keep going up and still the technology keeps improving, I just don't understand this equation. How does this work like this? And yeah.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting, because the only thing that everybody talks about is deflationary is technology itself. And the reason that technology itself is deflationary, I can buy a better computer or a better smartphone every year, is because it is getting more efficient. We are getting better at making them so exponentially quickly that despite all this value dilution that happens constantly with inflation, that it's still getting cheaper, right? Like if we actually had sound money, then I mean the prices of technology would be going plummeting, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not sure. I didn't look at electronics or the prices of those, but at least for groceries, the prices have been going up, even though we are losing our value of our money, even though with inflation too. It just adds up.
That's the illusion of fiat money, that it has distorted all the price signals.
Yeah, full of this stealing.
Two things that I still wanted to bring up. First, about the intrinsic value of part. There was just a really good article published by Connor Brown about this. That it's like 4 pages, but it's really on point, and very nice piece. And then one cool thing that Jeremy Sager from the chat asks, as a question, how about assassination markets? Do they fit in the non-aggression principle? And can we justify, or what are the axiomatic logical steps that we can apply to assassination markets? Shall I start, or did you want to?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay, so again, assassination is a neutral form. Assassination can be either aggressive or it can be defensive. And that is a major difference. The question is, who has started the initiation of force, right? Who has aggressed against another peaceful individual? The starter of the force, who started, who shot first, basically, that is the bad guy, right? He is the one that needs to be put in place. And then as soon as one is being attacked, as soon as one aggressor is here on the market, then every rational being has every right to defend itself, right? Of course. If someone runs at you with an axe and you have a gun, yes, you shoot him, of course, because otherwise you're dead, right? So with the act of aggressing against you, he has given up the right to life itself, right? That is the non-aggression principle, goes hand in hand with self-defense. But then the interesting question is, what is the limit here, right? If someone gives you a slap, can you blast a shotgun at his face? Probably not, right? We have to apply the minimum necessary force requirement. And this would mean that if someone gives you a slap, maybe you give him a slap back, but then that's it. If someone comes running at you with an axe, maybe don't shoot him in the head, but maybe take out his knee, right? And he can no longer come running. That will be a superior outcome. And then the same goes also here, or then to tie everything back to assassination markets. Assassination is neutral. If we use it to kill an innocent individual who has not aggressed against anyone, then the order giver and the order follower, both of them, are morally culpable for this. The order follower, the order doer, actually more so. The assassin is more guilty than the order giver because he has actually done the act, right? If I tell you shoot Alice and you do it, well, why did you do it, right? You're sovereign, like free-thinking individual, so the doer is actually even worse than the order giver. But in the case where we actually apply the minimum necessary force, for example, we have, I don't know, Goebbels or Hitler or some bad guy that we have proof that they have initiated aggressive violence. They are an aggressor and they are convicted so in a public court, for example, or whatever, like with several good, reasonable like arguments. Yes, that's a bad guy. He kills people. So what is the thing to do? Well, yes, we can cower down and try that he doesn't see us, right? That would be to evade him, probably a good strategy. But if we actually want to apply minimum force to defend ourselves, it might be very prudent to actually go assassinate this one individual, because then we might be to be able to prevent the death of hundreds more, right? So it's actually much in line with the minimum necessary force principle to then go out and actually assassinate that one individual. Now, if this is clearly an act in self-defense, then no harm was done, but actually justice was restored, right? But this is a very subtle difference. So assassination markets, yeah, they're probably a really good idea if done right? If they're actually used as a defensive force. But if we have like the ability to take out one or two or a couple of these tyrants who are literally killing everyone they get their hands across, then yeah, we should probably do it. And again, this is nothing where we have to step away from. No, of course not. If you can shoot Hitler, yeah, shoot Hitler. He does a bunch of bad stuff, right? So I think it's very interesting. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think you like the first thing that occurs to me is to follow like the incentives. So why would somebody want somebody dead, right? And I think our world is very corrupt right now because of our constant struggling to just to preserve our wealth and to be able to acquire economic goods. And I think that comes from distortions of the fiat world. I could be wrong. I mean, maybe there are just evil people out there that will use assassination markets and they'll they'll cause issues, but people get murdered all the time without these complex online assassination markets. So this is like the argument that essentially, how could we legalize drugs because people will do them? It's like, well, people already do tons of drugs all the time, right? So you're not stopping them at all. What you are doing is you're malinvesting into all this police force to stop people from doing things that they're going to do anyway, and you're wasting money putting them in jail to sit in a cell, and you're going to feed them 3 meals a day and provide a yard for them to go into, and just because they smoked a plant or they did something that didn't harm anybody else, and actually now we've created even more harm because we've created this black market. And there's a situation in Mexico, I think, is a decent example, where you have these cartels essentially that run the country, that even more so than the public police force, they have the private police force of the cartels, and they're more efficient than the public police force they've taken over there. So I think these are tricky things to talk about, and I can't talk about them as intelligently as Max, but those are the things that occur to me.
Yeah, I do agree with you both, and I just think that there is, of course, this problem of miscalculating the situation. I mean, let's say that someone runs towards you in a dark alley, and for some reason you might think that he's going to stab you, and you have a 9mm on your waist, and you go and shoot him in his stomach or something like that. But he was actually just running by to catch a bus or something, something stupid. I mean, there is, of course, this like extreme situations, but in general, I do think those like non-aggression policy and stuff makes sense. And I mean, and also there is this thing that about, I don't know about assassination markets itself, but people do tend to value, in my opinion, the human life itself, like in a totally different way here in Western countries, where we don't see that much of that, or like, yeah, we have all these safety measurements, so we don't have like 3 siblings that have already passed or something like that, which is kind of like basic in many different countries. Like shit just happens. But yeah, I mean, these are, of course, also different kind of trade-offs with security and freedom and all of that.
Yeah, so to the first thing that that you said about how can we actually tell if someone is being in self-defense, Walter Block, who we might actually read one of his books up next here, I think he even makes the argument in defending the undefendable, but he made that in a personal conversation with me a couple of times. It's actually quite a good argument here that, for example, if you are in a dark alley and you see a shadow coming at you, and you see, okay, this is a hasty and aggressive move, and he has something sharp in his hand, right? And the moonlight shines, and like you see, okay, there is some sharp thing in his hand. It's probably a knife, right? And if you then have a gun and you shoot him, that was actually self-defense, right? Right, because it was maybe even like if it was a gun, perfect, yes. Then you have successfully defended yourself, and you did not come to harm, and you applied minimum necessary force. But then on the other hand, what would be if he just starts flaming and he doesn't have a knife, but actually his watch, right, catches the moonlight exactly the same way, and you see just a silver flash all of a sudden in the dark, and then you shoot him. Well, he didn't have a knife with him, right? So maybe he was just playing, I don't know, a joke or whatever, but he did not have the means to actually harm you. It was an illusion on your point. And now that is a very, very interesting argument. And I would say that, well, at least it was a rational choice, in the sense that here the defender actually, or the shooter actually thought he was defending himself, right? And therefore, at that moment in time where he really needed to make a split-second decision, he was acting with like to his best of his capabilities in self-defense. It turned out it was wrong. It was not self-defense, but after all, he tried to do it. So I don't know, but it's a very interesting thought experiment.
Yeah, these are the little like weird situation, but yeah, I mean that's kind of like the way I think of the situation, that of course these kind of like accidents can happen, but I think both parties in that situation could have been performing a little bit better. I mean, do not run behind people's back in a dark alley or something like that. But there would be these asshole people, just being paranoid and thinking that every single people that looks at you is trying to kill you. So they would go on and on a shooting rampage because of that. But yeah, these are just the extreme cases.
Yep. Okay, very true. Well, maybe then we can take it back a bit to the book, which we hopefully all read, I trust. And maybe there, let's talk about one of the chapters that were here included, which, let me just pull it up and do a screen share, actually. Okay, so what was right here, public sector 1 and 2, the government and business. Which then here just tells what happens to business if in the case where aggression is involved, and so on the one basic part here, it would be okay. There is the aggressive part, right? So people actually get harmed. It's no longer a mutual beneficial choice, but rather one party is the extorter and the other is the one being extorted. So we can no longer apply mutual beneficial, the axiom to this. So one party has to benefit, right? In this case, the government. But then further, this means that people have to do the evading, right? As we said earlier, you have to actually go out and evade that aggressor and try to do something else. Like, for example, put your store of value into housing, not into currency. And then this would mean that we have malinvestment and overconsumption, right? That you buy the shit that you actually don't need. You assume that you need it because of that aggression. And that then leads to a destruction of capital, right? We buy plastic crap that no one needs. And thus we have to then eventually buy something new, right? To keep on consuming because all the stuff breaks. And this then means here that we actually decrease the production stages. We actually decrease the prosperity and we get poorer, right? Prices get more expensive all of a sudden, as Ben said earlier. So what are your thoughts? What are some of the other effects of government activity for business people?
I just think that's a consequence of that trade-off that we wanted to scale by centralizing the system and using paper money and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, the way I talk about it, maybe not as articulately as it will tie into the book, but that this system has corrupted our thoughts and our actions. Max is talking about the fact that we buy these plastic goods and that the market is creating these cheap goods because we need to constantly. So we constantly need to secure a stream of money to survive because we can't store our value. We need the stream of money to continue to come in so that we can survive, and that itself, the need for the streams of money, has corrupted our society to seek streams of money rather than to invest in sound investment to create things of real value that will stand the test of time. So our thoughts and our actions have been corrupted by this system of money, and that restoring, to rid ourselves of that corruption, to restore order in our minds, if you will, that we would need a sound form of money, a sound measuring stick by which we can measure the prices of things, so that we can see that they do actually get cheaper over time, so that we can see where money should be allocated and what makes a sound investment, what makes a quick money grab. Does that kind of tie in a little bit?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the incentive model itself is played in that way, so it's kind of like a logical conclusion to the problem itself that was handled in a certain way. I mean, creating this kind of like trusted paper money system, and then needing to scale that with a digital system and making it so easy to just give more loans and do fractional reserve just because you wanted to scale it much more faster.
And deficit spending too, right? Like the incentive mechanisms are completely screwed up. I just saw a tweet that said something along the lines of, the next U.S. president that wins will probably be the one that promises the most things. The one that spends the most money will be the one that probably wins. And I took a look at that for a second. I said, wow, these incentives are definitely not aligned. The person that puts us into the worst fiscal position that we could possibly be in as a country is the one that will probably win, because they can just print the money to pay for the difference, and people don't see that will how much that will hurt them, because the effect is so subtle and hidden. The fallacy of what you cannot see it creates this super poor incentive mechanism that the official that wins in your government is the one that spends the most money and makes himself look good for the short term of when they are in office, and then as soon as they get out of office, well, that's right about when these effects start to take hold. And then there's this worse, what do you call it? This worse, cycle of vicious cycle, where as soon as the one person gets out of office, well, then the next person's getting in, and all the effects from the first person's fiscal decisions are affecting the presidency of the next one. Well, now they'd have to spend even more money and inject even more liquidity and try to pump their own markets and make themselves look good. It's these incentives are not aligned, my friends.
You have a perfect argument
indeed.
that is also here very in line with a book that I just over the last couple of days reread, and that was Hans Hermann Hoppe, Democracy, the God That Failed. And he makes such a brilliant argumentation exactly on your lines that among many, many other reasons, that democracy is so inherently evil on many, many different layers. It's because that what we have here, government and democratically elected bureaucrats have a higher time preference as, for example, long-term monarchs. Right? They're both tyrants. They're both stealing from people. Both are evil. But the monarch has a higher time preference. He not just controls the capital stock of his slaves today, right? He can extract today's labor out of his slaves. Yes, he can do so. But he knows that he can do this until he's dead, right? Therefore, he has a long-term property rights on his slaves, not just the short-term fruits of the labor today. And therefore, he will engage in longer planning, right? And he might build up capital, right? And not be too tyrannically, because that actually destroys capital. But for a democratically elected bureaucrat, then he's also a tyrant. He's also stealing from others, right? Same piece of shit. But he has only the current capital state. He has 4 years, right? Then he's out of office. In these 4 years, he has to extract as much value as possible and give it to those people that he likes and himself, of course. So in those 4 years, the time preference is extremely high, because in the 5th year, you are out and you're no longer in the position of power to actually extract the wealth. So a rational being, right, would in this instance with these incentives actually have a lower time preference, a higher time preference, which leads overall to consumptionism, right? And which then is the explanation of deficit spending and 95% taxes as we have nowadays. By the way, monarchs had 5% taxes, 10%, right? At most. And that was during wartime only. And today we're 95%. Yeah, that's decent. I think that's all right.
Very interesting point. I didn't even know about that. Oh, I haven't thought about it. But yeah, I mean, they do have a much longer plan, or probably wanting to get as much stuff as possible for their legacy, and for the legacy to have a good country and all of that stuff. Good point.
Yep, Democracy That Failed, The God That Failed, it's one of those books that'll trigger everyone. because right, we've been like chilled with propaganda nonstop that democracy is like perfect, and like Hans Hermann Hoppe made in a speech a point that like if you believe that like democracy is actually the most perfect human civilization that we could ever achieve, right? It is the pure communist utopia, right? Democracy, yay, perfect. Then if you are of that belief, then you also have like democracy only works if everyone is a democratic state, right? If you have a monarch that doesn't work, right, then you will have tension. And so you have to then democratize the entire planet, right? And because then the entire planet is not yet democratized, therefore, we need to fight a war to those monarchs in order to get a democratically elected parliament on there, right? And then we will have one giant world government that is all run under a democratic leadership. And then we will be at everlasting peace, right? That is the claim of the democratic statist. He's like, we need democracy because that is peace, but there are people that are not yet peaceful, therefore I need to aggress against them, and that will be peaceful. And this is like, it's so fucked up, but this is exactly how the United States empire has functioned over the last couple hundred years. It's a democratic shit show, right? Tyranny by the majority. But this means they need to be in the majority. And thus, they actually have to conquer the entire fucking planet, which they pretty successfully did. And now we have to live with these consequences of having this Leviathan state here to kill us all. And it's crazy. But that is how like democracy functions.
Yeah, and then there's like this one other illusion that I feel like is deemed necessary to mention here, is that people will point to the last 100 or 200 years and say, well, look at all the progress that we've created, right? Like look at how much better the quality of life for the average individual is today than it was, 200 years ago, or look at the average life expectancy is, and say that, look, the system we have is allowing us to improve society, improve living standards for the majority of people. However, I believe this improvement that we've seen is due to technological improvement and not due to the system that we have. There is technological improvement despite the system that we have, and that the only progress we've seen is from the technological improvement. And in fact, that if we had a more fair and a more sound system, that we would see unprecedented growth and explosion of improvement of the way that we live our lives. And that's, I don't know, maybe I'm deluded to think that, but
no, very true, right? And it's the same argument as if like a slave on a farm, where he actually like has to like do like old American slave, for example. Then yeah, like he can be like, dude, look what we have. Like I have a shelter, right? I have a roof. I get fed twice a day by my master, and that is really nice. Look at what we have. Like without the master, I would not have that food. Isn't that perfect? Well, I mean, yeah, it's better than nothing. Might be better than starving, right? But nevertheless, like he doesn't even know, he can't even encapsulate what he's actually missing compared to a free life where you're not being aggressed against. And like again, slavery back then was like minimum amount of stealing compared to what is slavery today, right? So we endure much more suffering and much more aggression by this Leviathan tyrant compared to any other like, or well, of course, tough to say, but I mean, there have been shitty times in human history, but the last 100 years have been pretty fucking shitty, right? So it's not all that glorious, to be honest, and we can do so much better. And if you don't know how much better we can do, then you're just lacking in imagination and ingenuity. Because there are mighty many problems to solve. And when we do, we might actually have a quite nice life, actually.
I think oh, go ahead, Ralph.
I was just gonna say that that's one of the biggest problems that I have with democracy itself, and this kind of like politicians and the current system itself, is that high preference, like you guys said. For example, if a politician goes on and promises everyone to get a Lambo, or if he gets elected or something like that, he probably even gets he even probably wins. He gets so many votes, and people are, I'm not sure if is it just a high time preference or if just being stupid or something. these are the kind of things that is just fucked up, because you don't really have an option. And if the 51% decides something in democracy, you just have to obey. And even if you are not agreeing on that certain matter, and that can be used in a really bad ways. For example, let's say that, I'm not sure if there's more women or men in the world, but let's just say that either one, let's make a vote for some reason, which one is going to be a house slave or something like that. If 51% wins, the other ones don't have any kind of options. And that's something, if you go on vote in that system, that's when you agree with that certain outcome, whichever it is, that it's right or correct. You don't have any options. I just think that's so wrong.
Yeah, that's the tyranny of the majority, I think, right? I kind of want to respond to something I just saw in the chat where Christian said, we can't compete with China because slave labor or cheap raw materials with little regard to the environment that we all share. That's one crumb in this world. I actually think that, so labor is cheap in other countries because they have we have an inflated cost of living, like in the first world, and in the third world, it's not as inflated, the cost of living. And that the people that travel to other countries and remit money, they use remittance, they're performing geographic arbitrage on the world. They are exploiting the difference in the value of their time, their labor output, which is different among the world. And I believe that a lot of these differences are due to capital controls and the governments pulling these markets apart. And it goes back to my previous, the first thing I kind of started the conversation with was that when we can all transact with each other, these atrocities of how essentially, I was arguing with somebody once that said that Venezuela, that was the poor economic decisions of those leaders, and the consequences of what happened to their people is because of their poor economic decisions. And my first thought was that, well, I don't think that the governments of places like Venezuela or Zimbabwe should have the power to destroy the wealth of their entire country. That's not fair, right? That's not right. And if we all used Bitcoin, nobody would have that power to just destroy all the wealth of all of their citizens just by creating new money. And that I think a lot of these atrocities we see in the world will slowly be arbitraged through global economic activity. So
that's really well said. I mean, yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, great that point out the arbitrage that's actually happening when you have the really or these different types of inflation, right? And of course, we benefit greatly being here in the Western world because we are early recipients of the money. We are early in the Cantillon effect compared to many others. Like we are the aggressors by using fiat. You are actually stealing from others because you receive that money much earlier than any person in India would probably, for example, any average person there. They will not get their hands on US dollars. But guess what? The US dollars is what is the most the tip of the Ponzi scheme, right? So we're at the bottom of the US dollar, right? But still there are many people below us. So we get fucked, yes, but we fuck other people as well by using this shitcoin, right? And so it's again very much it's an individualistic choice. Which system do you want to support? Because again, holding a currency gives it its value. And every dollar that you hold, every euro that you hold, is not just your vote; it's your active consent and participation in the aggressive system that is fiat. And it's not really who is at the tip of the pyramid. It's who is aggressing against whom, and everyone who does it is a piece of shit. And if you hold fiat currency, you are actively stealing from others. But the fucked up thing is that you don't even notice it. because this is such a complex phenomenon going on, and that it's not a direct theft. It's a very indirect theft among a long, long time span and across several generations and different people and different economic activities. And so it's so messed up on many different levels. But ultimately, stop using fiat. It doesn't matter what the lead politician is. You stop killing people, period. That's it. Doesn't matter what other people do. Clean up your own house. As long as you're still hurting others by holding fiat Bitcoins, then you have to stop that. Or not, you're not going to live in a free world. Because if you aggress against others, well, then other people will aggress against you.
Yeah, I've been saying that same thing about shitcoins too. I mean, people are expecting shitcoins go down the drain, but still they are holding and buying them. It's just, they are the ones legitimizing the project, giving it volume, and like creating holders of that coin or whatever. You are making a decision when you use different type of money, and you have to choose wisely and know what you're doing.
History has shown us that one cannot insulate themselves from the consequences of others choosing to hold money that is harder than yours.
Very, very great observation. Absolutely. Again, it's kind of, again, the really crazy thing, because we are really early in Bitcoin, really early. And we are the early recipients of newly created sound money. That means we have a lot to benefit for everyone else coming in after us. Will actually have less of the benefit of using a sound money, and on several different layers, right? So it's not just the monetary increase in our purchasing power; it's also the mindset the shift and the benefits of peaceful economy. What actually is possible, we get to experience it first, and that's a tremendous benefit, and it's a tremendous privilege, right? And again, the question is, what do you do with it? Do you hoard your Bitcoin and don't tell anyone about it, right? Or do you hodl your Bitcoin, but do you help and educate your peers about this to actually raise them and give them the same opportunity to enjoy in this freedom society? So it's, again, we have a lot of crazy responsibility on our shoulders, merging what might be the most powerful levers on money that we've ever seen, and us being the first to hold it. We are at the very beginnings of the Cantillon effect, and even with good intentions, we have to be really fucking careful to not start stealing from others, because it's not always obvious, especially in the monetary sense, if you just have a glance opinion about it.
Yeah, I do agree, and in my opinion, Bitcoin is having or has had probably the fairest launch of currency ever. So we should really keep it actually in that way and provide some knowledge to people. I mean, that's what I think is our responsibility in this scene.
Yep, absolutely. And Satoshi did a really phenomenal job of inventing Bitcoin. I mean, seriously. But the issuance schedule is really interesting, because he had to give out the currency over a period of time, right? He couldn't just give himself 21 million Bitcoin in the Genesis block. That wouldn't work because of many reasons. So he had to give it out in a certain specific time window. But he understands that he doesn't just need scarcity, as we discussed earlier, but also monetary hardness, right? So a limited supply is superior to a endless or increasing supply, right? Satoshi understands stock-to-flow ratios. And so he knew that he wanted to cap it, right? So there was a limit and there was a time frame. But then the question is, how do you cap it, right? Is it a exponential growth like this, so that you have almost no issuance rate at the beginning and then a lot at the end, right? Is it linear, right, where it's just equal, like linear in the growth rate at least, or decrease rate, or do you have something exponential where the early participants stand to benefit, right? It's really difficult, and he did a genius thing off the halvening, which is it's a it's an immense reward for those who support Bitcoin early, and it does favor them quite heavily, right? And for example, if you would have a linear or a later exponential part, then the early adopters would not stand to benefit as much, right? So again, here the game theory, it's just Bitcoin helps those that actually support itself, right? Those people in the first 4 years of Bitcoin, they helped Bitcoin a lot because almost no one was helping Bitcoin. So the marginal returns. Wow, we have that as well. So we have decreasing marginal returns for every new person coming into Bitcoin, and this then would means that the early people were of huge value to Bitcoin itself, and then they get a huge sum of the benefit. Right, in the first 4 years, half of the Bitcoin were mined. It's insane. That's really, really a lot. And now being in the second happening, we're actually like in the third period. Now we are about to be at the end where it's almost nothing of new Bitcoin being created, which limits the effects of the Cantillon effect. But they were still here in the early days. And now pretty much after the next halving, 2020, then we're pretty good, right? We will have a very low Cantillon effect. So then people are no longer as incentivized to be part of Bitcoin because they no longer hold as much potential in their hands by holding this currency.
Yeah, but I think we are way too early. I mean, the benefits are just beginning, in my opinion. I don't know. I'm bullish in that. And one other thing that came to my mind is that, which is really great, that Satoshi actually realized that if he would have hoarded too many of coins for himself, people wouldn't be actually using this like protocol and system. And that's one of the things that many shitcoiners or no coiners seem to miss when they say that that bitcoins are being hoarded by a certain amount of people, and it's like the system is really centralized in ownership way or something like that, which is totally untrue in my opinion. Like if Satoshi is one of the guys who or people who has most of the coins, and even he has just a couple of percent, so it's just really a small thing. But either in the incentive model way also, you have this kind of like system which prevents people from hoarding way too much. I mean, this is like for example in mining, if someone goes on and hoards, for example, 50% of all the mining equipment or hashing power, people will start rejecting that system or start doing something else, or that would just screw up on your own feet by owning too much, which is kind of like a pretty interesting system. It would not be beneficial for you to own too much of Bitcoin or become a way too central like person in the system.
Because Bitcoin as a living organism would react to that. Right?
Yeah, kind of like.
Yeah, it would, right? Because Bitcoin is free sovereign individuals engaging in mutual beneficial action, and that is it's very powerful. And then, right, but also it's really cool that although we have these incentives, right, they are voluntarily chosen. And then we had a question here in the chat who said, like, what will happen if we no longer have a block subsidy? Who will keep on producing blocks? And I guess the question of production is not as interesting, because anything will be produced if it is desired, right? If there are customers willing to use anything, then people will go out and engage in the entrepreneurial act of production. But the demand has to be here first. And then the question is not who will produce Bitcoin when they no longer get a reward, but who will be willing to pay for it. And that is always the right question, also in the beginning of Bitcoin, because who paid for the mining power of Bitcoin? The early holders of Bitcoin. The holders, not the transactors. The holders had their percentage allocation in the money supply decreased with the indirect block subsidy, and they were the ones paying for it. And then to a very minor degree, those who are actually doing the transactions, they are more and more paying for it. And right now we're like, again, most of the majority of the mining power is paid by holders, not by transactors. But they are demanding it. And why do we know they are demanding it? They are still holding the currency in a voluntary anarchistic system where they could run any consensus rule. They still voluntarily choose to run Bitcoin Nakamoto consensus rules on their client. And this voluntary action proves that they stand to gain. Although the hodlers are giving away their purchasing power to the miners, they still desire it. So. And then even later, the people who desire to have a functioning network will do so. They will pay for it with, now in the latter sense, the direct payment of those people making the transaction, not just the people holding it, right? But actually mainly the people spending the Bitcoin on chain, which then of course also means that they will have to hold it. So it's a subtle difference, but always people are demanding block space.
Yeah, and I do think that that block reward thing is just a weird topic to think about right now, or at least discuss in a like in a sense of being worried. It's probably just 2140 when that would happen, when the block reward would go to zero, and by that I just think that every single thing that you need to produce heat, for example, to your home, or just to make yourself coffee or something like that, that would be, if it's really valuable, if Bitcoin still exists at that time, every single thing or product that you need heat with would be done, for example, with ASIC miners or something like that. That would be really cool, just to get a little bit more of money back for putting on a coffee pot or something like similar, or heating up your house with different kind of miners and getting a little bit of Bitcoins back to that. I don't know, there could be so many different things that might happen in this time.
I even attack that from the other angle, where it says, so like somebody was saying, who will run the mining network in the future? And it's like, well, those that can produce energy the cheapest. And in fact, people that can produce energy the cheapest are being rewarded by this network. So there's more game theory, right? A game theory on top of just incentivizing the network to exist. Now we're game theoretically incentivizing anybody that can create energy very cheaply. So what this is going to do is, no matter where you are geographically, as long as you are connected to the internet, which is relatively easy to connect to no matter where you are these days, even with satellites and other kinds of networks, that anybody that can create that can harness energy very cheaply, or even use waste energy and can dump it into Bitcoin, will not only secure the network, but they'll be rewarded for it. So this will actually incentivize people to find more efficient ways to harness electricity. And I also want to respond to another thing that Christian said. He said the Bitcoin miners and exchanges are centralized. We have whales. I think this is a really interesting topic, because I think a lot of people agree with this, that there are large whales that control large percentages of the Bitcoin network. And I think, yes, there are, for sure. Maybe the numbers are a little skewed because we don't, all we have is addresses that we can look at the blockchain, and we don't know who owns what. But this concept of Bitcoin going to the moon or going up in value a lot means these whales hold large vast sums of money, at which point they will exchange that Bitcoin for something else of value, whether it be a place to live or a product, or if they still value fiat, then they might change it for some fiat. They will. It's this idea of money burning a hole in your pocket, right? If the value of something goes up a lot, well, you might want to divest a little bit from it and diversify into something else that would provide you value. And every time the price goes 10x, then people are interested just to buy into this thing that's going up in value, and people that have seen their holdings go up in value are incentivized to trade it for something, which, a week ago it wasn't worth that, or a year ago or a month ago it wasn't worth that. Now that it is, everybody's nobody really knows what the price of Bitcoin is going to do. So when it does go up, well, people divest a little bit, and I think that's how one of the ways that the coins get distributed.
Yeah, great point, right? It's that people spam Bitcoin. That is use of the currencies to ultimately use it as a medium of exchange. So absolutely. But then also, in addition to what you said, it's who gets the money, right? And he who, it is a person who is an entrepreneur who has provided a valid service, a service that was valuable enough so that the hodler dishodled his Bitcoin, right? And that was a great feat. If you actually get someone to dishodl his sats, that is a pretty damn valuable product then. So all of a sudden, the money is now in the hands of someone who's really productive, who knows how to solve problems, and who has built something delightful, not just for himself, but for others, so that others were willing to sacrifice in order to get that thing that this individual has produced. So what we have is then that monies always flow in those hands that are productive. And this means it doesn't really matter who holds it. It's that sooner or later, if you are productive, if you help others, if you provide a valid service, the money will be in your hands, right? So it's in this sense the ultimate, it's power to the people, right? Because anyone who is productive can get that money, and that is very profound, right? And very liberating.
Yeah, its saleability over time means that you're eventually going to sell it for something, right?
Other than when you have infinite time value, and well, then you're just dead and you're not living. And that is actually not a definition of a human. A definition of a human is a rational being constrained by time, right? This time constraint is very important, and we can of course prove it because we all die eventually, and thus we have time preference. And therefore, if you don't have time preference, you're no longer human. Right? So then we are no longer in the realm of economics, and we can actually not say anything about whatever is going on, because we're no longer dealing with human action. Right? The first couple of great paragraphs of human action is exactly that. What is it actually to be human? To have purposeful action. And purposeful action can only arise under time constraints and with some other problem that needs to be solved. Right. So in that sense, everything else is la la land. We don't even have to go there because we will no longer be humans. So what is of interesting is only if you have time preference. And since we all do, this means we will all sooner or later dishodl our coins. Because ultimately, just the second before your death, you might as well then give that one Satoshi to buy yourself a loaf of bread. Right? Even if it's the one thing that saves you, then you will have to spend your Bitcoin. So ultimately, you always have positive time preference. You can never have negative.
All right. Well, that might be a good place for me to stop. My time preference is pushing me to do some other things right now.
How dare you? What is more valuable than talking about Austrian economics? Impossible.
Man's got to eat.
You have to get your marginal value preferences straight.
A man's got to eat. Otherwise, I won't be able to talk about Bitcoin tomorrow.
Well, okay, Pierce. Then for one more time, let's do the shilling. Pierce, this was the Bitcoin, the World Crypto Network for a New Liberty, the Bitcoin Reading Group. So please feel free to join us here for the next call. It was with us Ben Prentice, which you can find on Twitter at Mr. CoolBP, and CryptoRafe on Twitter as well. Pierce, if of course you want to read this book and then discuss with it, then come on the show and talk about it. Also visit us at one of the many Bitcoin events that we will be speaking at and doing talks at. And if you want to support with a new microphone, 10 million Satoshis are needed for that. That would be fantastic. If you have a question, call the HODL hotline. And that is not just me, but also actually CryptoRafa here on the call. If you want to speak to him about all this, for a humble donation of 1 million sats, you can get an appointment. That would be fantastic. So, okay, Ben, do you have anything else that you wanted to bring up with? Anything to end us out with?
Not this time.
Well, what a tease till next time. I guess the viewers have to have some high time preference, as there's some low time preference in order to yeah, get their desire in 1 week for the next Bitcoin reading group. Raphael, any last words?
Not really. We covered stuff pretty well today, and yeah, thanks for the invite. It was a really good one.
Yep, of course, yes. And one thing that I still wanted to do a shout out for is Fartface 2000, who has given us a $5 donation here on the tally, no, on the Twitter chat thing. And he has asked if I can do a video about installing Electrum Personal Server on a Mac using limited command lines, please. Well, no on 2 regards. First, I don't have a Mac and I don't intend to waste money on it. And 2, Electrum Personal Server is a pain in the ass to set up, and I actually could never figure out how to do it properly. And I never got it done because it was just crazy and I just couldn't. Well, good thing is that Electrum Personal Server is running on the novel, so you can buy that and have a one-click install of actually having that. I have no clue how K2Miner got that with a one-click install thingy. It's still complicated though, but it works. So yay for that. So, okay, Pierce, this was it. The World Crypto Network here with the Bitcoin Reading Group. Join us next Saturday, again at 7 UTC in order to talk about Bitcoin and Austrian economics and for a new liberty. Until then, bye-bye.